Hello guys, and welcome back to another Rise of Kingdoms video. I'm RoyalMixGaming, and today we're going to be going over some tips and tricks for Ark of Osiris and how to have just in general a better team. So I would say for Ark of Osiris, you're going to want to make sure that you have a good team. So what I would recommend you guys do is start out slowly with fewer people, because starting off with a 30-man team, 30-person team, is very difficult, especially if you're starting with a very new kind of players, people that don't know each other as well, or if you're throwing a bunch of random people in. So if you're really wanting to win and compete, you're going to make sure you're going to be reducing your team size, probably to start off with around 15 to 20 people, maybe less if you don't want to, or if you don't have as many people to play Ark in your alliance or in your kingdom. You're going to want to start with a small team because the odds are greater that your people in your team are going to do a better job overall. Another thing you want to do in Ark of Osiris whenever you're playing Ark is you want to make sure you have a good strategy. I'm going to leave the strategy out of this because everybody has a different one, and I'm not going to go over that. But you want to make sure you have a solid strategy, making sure that people understand what they're supposed to do, where their marches are supposed to go, and you want to make sure that they're just in general knowing the situation and what's the most important thing. Are you guys focusing on Ark? Are you focusing on the structures? You really just have to make sure you understand what your team needs to focus on so that you get the most points in the shortest amount of time possible. So I would say also that you would want to make sure that you're a very offensive team, because if you're always stuck defending your structures, you're not going to win. In general, you're most likely going to keep losing. So if all you ever do is defend your structure and swarm the rally and not push offensively very hard, you're not going to most likely get enough points to win unless you can always win Ark. You could always win Ark, but it's very unlikely that you're always going to win Ark. So if they ever disrupt your amount of points and you didn't push on them at all, well, you're just going to lose by the amount of points lost that you got from that disruption. So you're going to want to make sure you're doing as much hard pushing on them as you can, as organized as possible, and using good marches that do a lot of debuffs when you're swarming buildings and things like that. You want to make sure you have like a Trajan buffing the rally and buffing all the marches, swarming the structures that you're doing. You want to make sure you have Ethelflaed's debuff running. You probably want to have a Nevsky running around there, if not XY Nevsky rally, because that's probably the meta rally in Ark of Osiris right now, is either XY Nevsky, Chandra Nevsky, or maybe even Bertrand Nevsky, but I really think if you want the real DPS, it's definitely going to be XY and Nevsky together, because they pump out so much DPS so fast that sometimes, even if you're not swarming the building, if they haven't got it full, it's going to take it on its own pretty easily. So you want to make sure you're doing that. Make sure you have all your people doing their job, where they're filling the rally full and swarming the structure if that's what you're going to be doing, because you want to make sure you're pushing on the structures at some point so you can disrupt your opponent's points and make more points off of their loss of points. Probably some of the best defenses in Ark of Osiris right now are probably going to be Jadwiga in either Nevsky or Jadwiga in YSS. And you can also use Xeno YSS, but I would recommend you try and do cavalry most of the time, because it's faster to get into the structure and reinforce and swap marches out. Because if you use infantry, it's a very slow process if your people are having to march from very far away to keep reinforcing and swapping marches out in structures and things like that. So I'd recommend you do Jad and YSS, or Jad and some other combo that you think is really good after you guys have tested it. I do know that Jad and Nevsky is pretty good, but it's all up to your interpretation, how you guys want to do your defense. Some of the better Ark of Osiris skills that you can use whenever you're doing your Ark of Osiris match, the ones I would recommend you get is Running Charge, Hard Push, War Drums, Mystical Formation, Teardown, and then to the death, because whenever I've used Heaven's Grace, it doesn't really counter to the death necessarily as well. You could try and use it, but it's hard to say if it actually counters to the death very well, because to the death is such a high amount of damage over a minute. So to the death is a really good skill because it increases your damage by 100%, and you take 30% less damage for 1 minute. And I don't think that Heaven's Grace really is very good skill to counter it, so I would still take Teardown. But if you really think that you can counter to the death if somebody else uses it, you can always bring Heaven's Grace. I wouldn't bring Valiant Stand or any of these Bog Downs or any of these fancy ones unless you really think that you're going to need them for your strategy. Like I said, it depends on your strategy. But in general, the ones I list off are probably the best ones for an offensive, high-paced, and very disruptive Ark of Osiris match for yourself, because it's good for middle, it's good for building, pushing, and it's good for taking the Ark and running away with it. Because you would use running charge to run the Ark carrier, hard pushes for rallies, war drums, and mystical formation is for middle, and then teardowns for structures if you have to very quickly take a structure down, depending on what you're doing. And then 2 to death is going to be I would say like a 70 to 80% chance you would take that Ark if you're going to be contending for it and you need it. But don't forget, you can only use 2 to death once and it's gone, so you can't use it again because the cooldown's 1 hour and the Ark is only 1 hour. So once you guys have created your team, you've got probably 15 people, maybe a little bit more, depending on the size of your alliance and how you guys want to run it. You want to slowly add in more people to up to 30. So if you guys ever wanted to compete for your Osiris League, you have 30 members, you have to have 30 members, plus I think it's 15 backups. So you'd want to slowly work up to over 20 people and add one to 2 people per arc, maybe every other arc. Once you have gotten all your people trained to do what they're supposed to do on your strategy, you would want to make sure you slowly add up to 30 members. Maybe in the off season you still can go down to 20-something people if you want to have an easier match. But in general, you will have to have 30 members for Osiris League, and that's what you're going to be working towards if you want to compete at all. And even if you can't win Osiris League, which is very difficult, you can always try and get into like the top 32 or top 64 and get an extra 20-30 heads, depending on how many matches you win, because it's a weekly Osiris League matches. It's not every other week when that comes around. So those are my tips and tricks for you guys for Ark of Osiris, is just to have a small team, get the strategy down right, make sure you have the right skills for Ark of Osiris, make sure you have the right marches when you're swarming and when you're fighting in the open field in general. You want to have debuffers, you want to have Guan Yus, XYs, things that do high skill damage marches, Nevskis, things like that. Main things you want to have are debuffers most of the time. Buffs are nice, but most of the marches that you use for that are slow. So you just want to make sure you are having a good team and you are practicing when you can with that small amount of group and fine-tuning it down to the point where you guys all know what's going on and what your job is and your role. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Leave a comment down below if you have any other suggestions for people in general on Ark of Osiris, any suggestions, tips, or tricks that you think are really good. Drop a like on the video and subscribe if you haven't already. And I hope you guys have a nice day, and I'll see you on the next one.